Hello my friends, it's Krebs here, and I am sure you've all seen the footage of tanks already. Krebs, why are you so slow with showing us footage of tanks in War Thunder? I am slow because yesterday the footage came out literally as soon as I started my shift at work. I am sorry I'm slow, but I am going to be featuring this video where I'm talking about stuff with the tanks and highlighting things you probably, maybe, wouldn't have noticed yesterday when you were watching that footage. So yeah, we're going to be watching some of the old footage, but it's going to be showing some stuff you might not have seen. Alright then, let's jump straight on into it. The version that they are showing this footage is a developer version of the game. In fact, if you look at the numbers very closely, it's 0.0 something 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 0. It's essentially zero. It's a version of the game that we wouldn't normally have access to. Whenever we go on the developer server, it's always something slightly higher than the normal server, the official one. So say for example, if we went on the dev server, we would expect it to be like 1.37, around that number. But in fact, it's not, it's zero. It's not necessarily an older build because they've advanced the game so far, but they are playing with a version that's not akin to ours. In fact, for example, they don't have events. There is no event button in the top left, unless they've moved that somewhere. They might be playing on an older version. Now then, there is a lot of footage on the tanks. Game modes, for example. Some generic things, some general things over with tanks. Game modes. What they displayed yesterday was a sort of, I don't know, it's like a domination sort of looking thing, I guess you could say. There was objectives on the actual maps that you had to try to get to. Whether you were capping it, I have no idea, but you're trying to destroy tanks, I imagine, to get to those objectives. Now, they've separated out these objectives for both ground targets and air targets. If you look closely, the air targets do have different objectives on the maps. They can go to different places if they so wish. Now, whether these objectives are places like runways to capture or something like that, I have no idea, but it's separated between air targets or air and ground forces. The maps are different for both planes and tanks. For example, the planes have a larger scale map that they can fly around on, and this is also reflected by the map that they can view. It's just larger scale. The tanks, they're more constricted into a smaller area. They have their own map as well of this smaller area. When planes are flying from their larger map to that smaller one where the tanks are located, it seems like the detail goes from less detailed to more detailed. Now, I don't know if this detail is actually all across the map or if it's just where the tanks are. We don't know that yet. So, one thing you might not have noticed, and it's easy to overlook it, I guess it's kind of obvious, but you could overlook it, is there is a mini-map when you're driving around in your tanks. I guess you could get lost somehow when you're in your tanks, because when you're high up in the air you can see everything below you. You've got a bird's eye vision. When you're driving tanks, you might not necessarily know where everything is. So they've included a map. Now this could be a bit interesting because it's sort of reminiscent of a World of Tanks map. There are ways that you can see icons moving around on the map, say your friendlies moving around on the map. Now, will enemies be shown on that map as well? Possibly, I would imagine so. And that makes it a bit interesting. So, you can see your friendlies. When you're in tanks, you can see your friendlies. However, when you're flying planes, you do not see indicators of enemy tanks. I don't know if this is reflected with your friendly tanks as well, but you cannot see indicators of enemy tanks. Now for the actual vehicles, you have two factions available at the moment, the Germans and the USSR, each having 4 tanks available to them of different kinds. You have lights, mediums, and heavies. It doesn't really show that much right now, but who knows at release if there will be more. I imagine there would be. 4 doesn't seem like a whole lot. Tanks have no health bars. So World of Tanks we know has health bars, World of Warplanes have health bars. War Thunder really does not like health bars. Whether it's planes, whether it's tanks, there's no health bars. But there is some sort of damage model. I think it's a damage model anyway. As you can see from the footage, as soon as the tank takes damage, even slightly, a little icon appears in the bottom left. It doesn't really show that much at the moment. I'm not sure if that actually is due to tank damage. However, it seems to crop up as soon as your tank is taking damage, and that might be something similar to what there is for planes, showing that there might be critical components that have been criticaled or damaged. Because what I've noticed so far from this footage of tanks, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of critical damage. Maybe that's something that they'll be working on towards the release of the game. Rotations, the actual speed at which your tank goes at. There are gears, rotations, and speed. Obviously, if you want to try to increase your speed, you're going to need to change your gear to a higher gear. But now, there's also rotations, and that makes it a bit interesting. Why have they included rotations and speed? If this was just your average old game, and they were trying to simplifying things, they might just do gears and speed. However, they've also included rotations, and now this might make sense if there are different sort of grounds. If there are different sort of, say you have soft ground, you have marshy ground, you have hard ground, rock or stone or whatever it might be, dirt, you might traverse across that different ground at a different speed. And so say if you're going through a muddy patch, for example, you might have high rotations, but you won't have necessarily a higher speed. You might have actually a slower speed than if you had the same number of rotations on a normal dirt road. Interesting, no? There are different tank shells, 3 that I can see from the moment. These might be armor-piercing HE. You might also have some sort of, I don't know, combination, some sort of gold ammo, if you want to consider it like that. Although I doubt that there would be gold ammo in this game. Chances are, it just might be something like a more expensive type of ammo shell. Tank abilities. There seems to be an off-map artillery call-on, but not all tanks have it. I've noticed it with a few tanks that you can use the ability, in fact most of them. However, the KV-1, no ability whatsoever. Why did it not get access to it? Is it because it's a heavy tank? Could it be that tank destroyers and mediums and light tanks have access to artillery? It's a possibility. The explosive nature of artillery and tank shells means that there is an area of effect. You can do damage over an area. No, fair enough. You'd expect that with artillery, and you can see it that it kills 2 people. So that could definitely mean some tactical advantages. You could try to be tactical with your artillery, look over mounds, place it somewhere where you anticipate your enemy to go. Fair enough, it could be tactical. But your shells can actually do explosive damage as well, as this guy does. He explodes a shell in front of him, and it does a little bit of damage to himself. Now this could mean that you could also do damage next to a tank. You don't have to hit a tank directly on. It could be beside them, and it does slightly bit of damage to them. Could you imagine doing damage to tracks? I could totally imagine that. Now, it also means you could do damage to your teammates. Friendly fire, as they say. Hopefully it won't become a big issue, especially with artillery. Hopefully there won't be too much griefing. Now, the last thing that I did notice is that you can flip over your tanks. Physics is already implemented in the game. When World of Tanks first came out, there wasn't physics like there is now. Tanks were locked down to the ground. They were hugging it. Now, in War Thunder, straight from the get-go, there's going to be physics. You can crush trees. You can flip your tank over. That's amazing. So that's pretty much all the stuff that I noticed so far in this video. One question I do have is about the tank abilities. Is that artillery? Is that going to be just an off-map artillery, or is that going to be based on artillery throughout the map? It would be so interesting, so interesting, if the artillery right on across the map was used to fire on that location, and planes or tanks could use their power to destroy those artillery positions, having a sort of impact across the battlefield. Your team has to work together to try to combine their efforts. If the artillery positions go down, then you can't have artillery being called on. Now, this is just a question. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if the ability is dependent on artillery on the map or independent of artillery on the map. However, it would make for some interesting dynamics in the game. So anyway, guys, that is what I've noticed. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. This is Krebsy, and I will catch you all later.